From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Facebook gets out of the fact-checking business as the House of Representatives passes its first bill of the year, the Laken-Riley Act, to crack down on illegal immigration, with 48 Democrats voting yes. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua and columnist Bill McGurn. For years now, Facebook has paid a crew of third-party fact-checkers at organizations like PolitiFact and Reuters Fact Check to put ratings on content which might end up labeled as false or restricted in some way from going viral. On Tuesday, though, the CEO of Meta, the Facebook parent company, Mark Zuckerberg, said in an online video that this program would soon be ending. He said it's time to get back to our roots around free expression. Here's a little bit more from Mark Zuckerberg.
We're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system.
Zuckerberg also added that this means there would end up being more, quote, bad stuff, unquote, on his platforms, but would also reduce the number of other things that were erroneously taken down. Monet, what do you make of this change by Facebook? And do you suppose that it presages a broader change in thinking and the approach to speech on the internet?
Yeah, I think there are two major ways to read Mark Zuckerberg's decision to remove the fact checkers from Facebook. There's the cynical read and there's the sympathetic read. And this is from the perspective of someone who agrees with the premise that the fact checking had gone too far and that the honest debate among users was being constrained. The cynical read, and this is the one that you're hearing from a lot of progressives in the wake of the announcement, is essentially that Zuckerberg is bowing to Trump's victory and trying to do something to curry favor with the new administration. I think that he certainly did see the outcome of the election as signaling a lot of dissatisfaction with elite progressive consensus in media, et cetera. And there's a ton of truth to that a lot of voters were drawn to Donald Trump because of that. Trump now is coming in with a broad mandate into the White House again and is going to obviously be in a position to make decisions that are going to affect Facebook and a whole variety of other large companies, tech and otherwise. And so you've seen CEOs like Jeff Bezos and others taking action to try to get back in Trump's good graces. And so I'm certain that Mark Zuckerberg intended to do that to repair some of the damage in his relationship with Trump that came from Facebook deciding to ban Trump in the wake of January 6th. But I do think that there is a legitimate, more sympathetic reason why Mark Zuckerberg decided to take this action, which is that he actually agrees that some of the content restrictions had gone too far, both in the sense of truth for truth's sake. There were a lot of mistakes that Facebook made, for example, in 2020 and 2021 when it came to moderating content relating to COVID. There was a lot of overreach in the types of things that they were censoring. A lot of scientists who were raising legitimate doubts about the consensus about how the disease would spread ended up having their voices censored. And he probably over the past few years has reviewed some of those decisions and seen, hey, we actually did get this wrong and it would have been better if we had allowed an open debate. I think it's also likely that Facebook has lost users because of the way that it suppresses controversial political opinions. I think a lot of people like to debate politics openly with their relatives, with the public on these types of platforms. And the idea that certain perspectives, particularly conservative perspectives, are being suppressed probably led to a lot of disenchantment and disengagement with the platform. So he also has a material interest in reforming the standard in ways that have little to do with politics. So I think that there's a mix of reasons why he made the decision. But in general, it is a step in the right direction. And hopefully there will be more similar decisions to come from media organizations, social media platforms, et cetera.
I have some sympathy for the problem that these social platforms face. I think in the early days of the internet, Mark Zuckerberg's view, the view in Silicon Valley writ large, was that they would set up these platforms and the best of humanity would come out on them. There'd be people connecting and meeting old friends and setting up small businesses to sell things online. And a lot of that, to be clear, does happen. But it's also a form for the less attractive parts of humanity: impersonation, harassment, direct harassment, people who know each other, people who don't know each other, foreign influence operations. There's a recent Inspector General's report from the Justice Department that talks about Iranian operations to pretend to be Proud Boys during the 2020 election and go on the internet and make videos suggesting that the Proud Boys were harassing voters. Yet in reality, all of this stuff was coming from Iran. On COVID, I think it's pretty clear that the Biden administration went overboard in pressuring these social sites. And some of these claims that were rated as false, like the idea that COVID could have originated in a Chinese lab, then later turned out that maybe they're not so false. On the other hand, there's all sorts of stuff in the record that looks good faith to me, like these social sites reaching out to public health authorities and saying, we're seeing a lot of claims that these COVID vaccines can cause hepatitis, or that vaccinated people are a risk to unvaccinated people just by being in close contact. Can you guys tell us if there's any truth to those things? Facebook and other platforms don't want to be host to a lot of that ugly content, in part because it's bad for business. They are at core advertising businesses. Facebook doesn't allow nudity generally for the same reason, but then there's exceptions in its policy for classic paintings and sculptures and breastfeeding photographs. Facebook launched its live video service, and it wasn't long before there were a few users uploading suicide videos. And so, Bill, I guess my takeaway is that all of this stuff runs the spectrum, and there's still going to be content moderation on Facebook even after this change. Notably, Zuckerberg is saying that the trust and safety teams are going to be run out of Texas from now on instead of California, whether he says there's less concern about the bias of our teams. But it seems to me that trying to fact check the internet, more or less, was never going to be easy. And Facebook now has basically decided that that's what it needs to give up on. It was an impossible job.
Yeah, Facebook seems to now to decided that the Elon Musk approach is better. More speech, limited control of it. I think it's a great victory for free speech that we're getting past these self-anointed fact checkers. Our colleague, James Toronto, has written a lot about so-called fact checkers. And even apart from the social media sites, their pernicious influence, it's so cheap to having a debate and start saying, well, Kai, you can't even participate because I find you're spreading misinformation. It kind of stacks the debate. I agree that the social media sites have all these problems with bad actors and so forth. It's a balance. It's really hard to do. But I think they're not in trouble because they tried to stop bad actors. They're in trouble because they stopped honest actors and accused them of spreading misinformation. I mean, the two most glaring examples, one you alluded to, COVID. They tried to suppress the Great Barrington Declaration and any of the authors, which was basically a document. They were mostly against lockdowns, right? I think they've been vindicated, but they were declared as going up against the received wisdom of the government and wrong, and they were censored on social media. The second is Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, there's no difficulty in understanding what they did there. They took a side and they spread disinformation by suppressing the New York Post story. So I think this is a great change in the company, in a much better direction, in the Elon Musk direction. I would say also that the new chief of global affairs, Joel Kaplan, is a friend of mine. We worked together in the Bush White House where he was deputy chief of staff. He's conservative, an honest, sensible man, and one of his best friends is Brett Kavanaugh. And I think they're getting on the right track.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Monet, Zuckerberg speaks of the community notes model that has been adopted by formerly Twitter, now X.com. As I understand it, that process works by essentially the wisdom of the crowds, that if some tweet goes viral and it looks like it is false information, other users can append helpful notes to it, and then the cream floats to the top, and that helpful note gets added at the bottom of the original tweet. That's an interesting model. The competing new social site Blue Sky has a different approach. Reading from a news story at The Verge, it's using an open source moderation tool called Ozone, letting individual developers create their own moderation services, and then users can pick among those and essentially choose what level of content moderation they want. And so part of what will be interesting to see over the next few years is how these models develop and how well they work in practice.
Yeah, I think that the variety of different models just shows that there are intermediate things that you can do between outright censoring content that is questionable or false and leaving it completely open. I have seen the community notes on X, and many of them are very helpful. I definitely have seen a lot of posts there that have gone viral, gotten a huge audience, and it turned out that they might not have been outright false, but were clearly construed in a way to present the wrong conclusion to people and were being shared by people who didn't quite understand the issue at hand. And so they established this process by which people could append essentially a clarification, a broadening of context. And I think that that does help to prevent false or defamatory stories from going too broad without the right amount of context attached to them. So I think that, yeah, that's exactly the type of thing that these platforms should be experimenting with. Hopefully they'll continue to refine it.
The result, though, Bill, is that we end up having a more or less free market competition between these kinds of models, and users can decide which works for them, which of these sites are places that they enjoy spending their time and see content that is useful to them. And if they see content that is not useful to them or that seems misleading to them or harassing to them, they can leave. And to my eye, that is a better approach than some of the previous arguments you've heard, including from the Republican side of the aisle, that the government needs to get involved here, that, you know, these social sites should have to get some kind of certificate from the Federal Trade Commission saying that they are politically neutral, they aren't moderating content in a biased way. It does seem like this is all kind of getting sorted out now.
Yeah, I agree. And also, a lot of times these Republican calls for some authority to say you're being fair or you're not being fair, they don't realize it begs the same question: who's going to control the authority? What you can use for your purposes to force unwanted speech off the social media site can be used by the other side's forces to force your speech off. So I think Monet hit on his last line. He hopes like community notes would be further refined. I don't think that's the last word. I think it's a great step forward. But with all this competition, there should be a lot of models for enforcing accountability, and then they'll learn from each other, and we'll come up with much better system. And the market not only is better, it's faster. The government is very clumsy in getting to these solutions, and the market comes up with reasons and can do things much faster, much better.